Montana Territory, June 1881. Mariah Kersey did not look back. The hem of her dusty riding skirt caught on the bramble as she pushed through the pine thicket, heart hammering like a wild drumbeat in her chest. Her palms were scraped, her once white gloves long discarded. Behind her, the smoke from the Kincaid estate still curled into the evening sky, a reminder of everything she was running from. She had escaped. Not just the estate, not just the expectations, but a man. Elias Kincaid. A banker's son with cold eyes and a fist that had found her ribs more than once during their short, cursed engagement. She had not waited for the wedding. She had waited for darkness. Now the soles of her boots slapped hard against the dry earth, carrying her farther from the valley and deeper into the mountains. She did not know where she was going, only that she could not go back. By the time the sun dipped below the ridge, her legs gave out. She collapsed beside a creek, her breath ragged, her corset too tight. She tore it off with shaking hands, letting it fall into the water. When the coolness hit her lungs, she wept. Not loud, not wild, just quiet sobs into her sleeve until exhaustion pulled her under. She woke to the sound of hooves. Her eyes snapped open. A rider moved down the trail, leading a buckskin horse and carrying a lasso coiled at his side. He saw her before she could move. He slowed, dismounted. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-worn skin and a dark beard that framed a strong, quiet face. His hat tilted low as he studied her, boots crunching softly over the pine needles. "You lost?" he asked, voice low and calm. Mariah sat up slowly. "No, you hurt?" She shook her head. "No," he looked at the creek, then back at her. "You ran." She swallowed hard. "Yes." He did not ask from what. He just nodded once, like he understood more than he let on. "I'm Gideon Ellard," he said. "Mariah Kersey." They stared at each other for a moment. Then he crouched and opened his saddlebag, pulling out a tin cup and a strip of jerky. "You hungry?" Her stomach growled before she could answer. She nodded. He handed her the food, then filled the cup from the creek. "My cabin's not far. Safer than sleeping out here." She hesitated. "Why would you help me?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Because you look like you need it." She followed him. It was not far. A small cabin nestled in a hollow, smoke trickling from the chimney. A corral with 2 horses and a porch with a rocking chair that creaked in the breeze. Inside, it was warm and simple. A wood stove, a table, a battered bookshelf. It smelled like pine and tobacco and something faintly sweet, maybe apples. Mariah stood awkwardly near the door, clutching the tin cup. "You can sleep in the loft," Gideon said, nodding toward the ladder. "It's not fancy, but it's safe." She looked at him, really looked. He moved with quiet steadiness, like a man who had grown used to silence. "You live alone?" she asked. "I do." "Family?" His jaw tightened slightly. "Had a wife. She died 5 years ago. Had a son. He's buried next to her." Mariah's heart ached. "I'm sorry." He just nodded. "Get some rest. We'll talk in the morning." She climbed the ladder. The loft had a mattress, a quilt, and a single window that looked out over the trees. She lay down fully clothed, staring at the ceiling, listening to him move below, his boots soft on the floorboards, the clink of metal, the creak of the chair. She had never felt so far from everything. And somehow, she had never felt safer. The next morning, she woke to the smell of coffee. Gideon was already at the table, sipping from a tin mug. He pushed a plate toward her biscuits and scrambled eggs. "You cook too?" she asked, sliding into the chair opposite him. He shrugged. "Had to learn." She ate in silence, watching him over the rim of her cup. He said little, but everything he did said more than words. The way he refilled her plate without asking, the way he glanced at her hands, noticing the scrapes without making her speak of them. After breakfast, she helped him split wood. She was clumsy at first, the axe too heavy, her arms sore. But he guided her quietly, stepping behind her once to show her the grip, his hands warm on hers. "Like that," he murmured. Her breath caught. She nodded. By noon, she was laughing just once, when the log bounced and hit her boot. He smiled then, a real one, faint but there. The days passed. She stayed. She told him her story one night by the fire. Elias. The bruises. The locked room she had escaped from with a hairpin. Her plan to ride east, to find her aunt in Missouri. He listened without interruption. When she finished, he said, "You do not have to run anymore. I cannot stay here forever." "Why not?" She looked at him. "Because you are kind, and I am broken." He set down his cup. "You are not broken. You are breathing. That is enough." She blinked hard. That night, she lay awake in the loft, staring at the rafters. Below, she heard him turn pages in a book. The wind whispered through the trees, and something inside her shifted. Each day after, she felt it more the way he looked at her when she laughed, the way he stood just close enough to catch her if she slipped, the way he left wildflowers on the table without saying a word. He never tried to touch her, never pushed, but she began to want him to. One afternoon, as they rode out to check the traps, she asked, "Why did you help me?" He glanced at her. "I saw a woman who needed a place to be safe, and I had one." She watched the way the sun touched his hands, the quiet way he rode. "You are not like him," she said. "No, you are better." He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time, she saw it in his eyes. He wanted her too. Gideon handed her a small sack of seed as they stepped into the garden patch behind the cabin. The air was thick with the scent of turned soil and the hush of wind threading through the cottonwoods. Mariah pressed her boots into the soft earth, sleeves rolled to her elbows, linen damp across her back from the heat. He knelt beside the row he'd dug earlier. "You ever plant anything?" "No," she said quietly, kneeling across from him. "My mother kept roses in Charleston, but I was never allowed to touch the beds. Said I bruised the petals." He glanced up, a flicker of something unreadable passing across his brow. "These won't mind your hands." They worked in silence for a time, sun warming the tops of their shoulders. Mariah pressed kernels into the furrow, Gideon moving ahead of her with practiced rhythm. A bird called overhead, sharp and sudden, and she looked up, shielding her eyes. "I used to think the West would feel emptier," she said after a moment. Gideon kept his focus on the soil. "Most folk come here expecting that. But it's full, just quiet about it." She brushed dirt from her palms. "Were you born here?"
No.
"Georgia, originally. Came out after the war. Didn't find anything worth staying for till I crossed into Montana." Mariah hesitated. "You fought." "I did." She waited, but he said nothing more, and she didn't press. Instead, she reached for the next row, the sun catching the curve of her cheek. That night, she stood by the wash basin near the back door, dipping a cloth into cool water, wiping the day from her arms. Gideon sat on the porch, one boot propped against the railing, guitar balanced across his knee. His fingers moved slow across the strings, pulling a tune that thinned into the dusk like smoke. She stepped closer, drawn by the sound. "You play well," she said. He didn't look up. "Taught myself. After." The melody shifted, softened. "Do you sing?" He shook his head. "Not anymore."
She didn't ask why.
Instead, she lowered herself onto the step beside him, folding her hands in her lap. "I was taught to play piano," she said. "But only hymns. Anything else was considered improper." "You miss it?" he asked. "Sometimes. Not the rules." The song faded into stillness. They watched the stars come out, one by one, the sky deepening to indigo. "I dreamed last night," she said softly. "I was back in that parlor." The door was locked again. My voice didn't work. He turned to her, his gaze steady. You're not there now. I know, she whispered. But sometimes my body forgets. Gideon set the guitar aside. Takes time. The remembering and the forgetting. They don't move at the same speed. Her fingers curled around the edge of the step. Have you ever been afraid to sleep? He nodded once. For a long while. She looked at him then, really looked the scar just beneath his jaw, the way his hands stilled when the wind blew hard. She didn't know the shape of his grief, but she knew it lived close to the surface. You never remarried? She asked. No, because of her? Because I didn't want to ask someone to live with a ghost. Mariah's chest tightened. Maybe the right person wouldn't mind the company. His eyes met hers, something soft and aching behind them. Maybe. They sat together until the night turned cold. When she rose, he stood too, and for a moment they lingered, breath close enough to share. She stepped back first. Good night. He nodded. Sleep safe. She climbed the ladder with the scent of pine smoke still in her hair and the sound of his music lingering behind her ribs. The next morning brought rain. Not a storm, just a steady drizzle that soaked the roof and darkened the woodpile. Gideon pulled on his coat and saddled the horses. When she stepped onto the porch, he handed her a wide-brimmed hat. You'll want this. The trail gets slick.
She frowned.
Trail? He adjusted the strap beneath his chin. We're going to town. Supplies are low, and you'll need clothes. Proper ones. Mariah hesitated, fingers tightening around the hat's rim. Someone might recognize me. Town's small. But if they do, they won't get past me. She looked up at him. The quiet certainty in his voice settled something inside her. I'll ride with you. They took the long path down through the trees, past the ridge where the old telegraph line sagged between posts. The rain softened as they rode, mist curling around the hills. When the general store came into view, Mariah's stomach twisted. Inside, she kept close, eyes down. Gideon moved with purpose, greeting the shopkeeper woman in her middle years with sleeves rolled high and a sharp, assessing look. Gideon Ellard, she said. Didn't expect you in till next week. Storm's coming, he replied. Figured I'd get ahead of it. Her gaze shifted to Mariah. And who's this? Mariah Kersey, he said without pause. The woman nodded. New to the territory? I am, Mariah said quietly. The shopkeep offered a faint smile. Well, welcome. Ain't much here, but it's honest. They left with bolts of calico, dried beans, and a pair of sturdy boots wrapped in brown paper. Back at the cabin, Mariah unwrapped the boots slowly. The leather was rough, but well made, the soles thick. She ran her fingers over the stitching. I can work, she said. You've given me shelter. I don't want to take without giving back. Gideon leaned against the doorway, arms folded. You already do. I mean real work. He studied her a moment, then nodded. The east fence needs mending. We'll ride out tomorrow. That night, she didn't dream of the parlor. She dreamed of soil between her fingers and rain on the brim of a borrowed hat. By the time the last post was set into the earth, the sun stood high and sharp above the ridgeline, throwing long shadows through the tall grass. Mariah wiped her brow with the back of her wrist, the skin beneath her collar sticky with sweat and dust. Her hands ached, but the ache was clean, not like bruises, not like fear. Just work. Gideon knelt beside the final length of wire, stretching it taut with a practiced grip. His eyes narrowed against the light. You held steady, he said. Most folks flinch the first time the wire snaps back. I'm not most folks, she said, straightening. No, he said, and left it at that. They walked back slow, horses trailing behind with reins slack. The meadow buzzed with heat. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried once and was gone. At the cabin, Gideon turned toward the shed. I'll oil the tools, he said. You go on. Rest a while. Mariah stepped inside and unlaced her boots, her fingers stiff from the fence work. She poured a dipper of water from the barrel and stood by the open window to drink. The breeze brought the faint scent of iron and wild sage, and beneath it, the low whistle of Gideon humming something she didn't recognize. She hesitated, then walked back out barefoot, crossing the yard to the shed. He stood at the bench, sleeves rolled, forearms streaked with dust. She leaned against the doorframe. "Has anyone ever come looking for you?" she asked. He turned the wrench slow in his hands.
"Once.
"A man who served with me. Didn't stay long."
Why?"
"Too much silence," he said. She stepped further inside. "I don't mind it." Something passed across his face, almost relief. He set the wrench down and wiped his hands on a cloth. "You ever think about what you want now?" he asked. "Not what you left. Not what you escaped. Just
now."
She crossed to the work table, fingertips grazing a coil of rope. "I want to wake up and not brace myself. I want to speak and not be punished for it." "You speak fine," he said. "You always have." She looked up at him. "What do you want, Gideon?"
He paused.
"To have someone stay. Not because they have to. Just because they mean to." Neither moved. The quiet between them settled deep. Later that afternoon, they rode along the northern ridge for no reason other than the sky had gone clear and the horses needed the stretch. Mariah let her mare pick through the slope while Gideon led the way along a narrow deer trail, the sun glinting off the creek far below. He stopped suddenly and pointed. "See there? That's wild onion. Grows thick this time of year." She dismounted and knelt beside the patch, plucking a few shoots. "My mother never cooked. We had a maid for that. I didn't learn a thing past tea service." "You'll learn fast out here," he said, tying his reins to a low branch. She looked back at him. "Do you want someone who already knows how to live like this?" He shook his head once. "I want someone who's willing to try." They returned just before dusk. Mariah fried the onions with beans over the fire, while Gideon tacked up the porch roof, where the rain had gotten in the week before. Neither spoke much. The comfort was in the rhythm, two people tending a life that was slowly becoming theirs. That night, she stepped outside after washing the plates and found him leaning against the porch rail, hat pushed back, eyes on the stars. She joined him. The air smelled of pine and ash. "I used to think love came with thunder," she said. "That it had to announce itself loud." "And now?" he asked. "Now I think it's a man who listens. Who shows up with coffee and boots and quiet." He looked at her then. "Mariah." She took a breath. "I'm not afraid of you." He reached for her hand, not sudden, not bold, just a question in the shape of a touch. She answered by threading her fingers through his. He didn't kiss her.
Not yet. But he didn't need to.
The promise was already there, steady and sure between their palms. The rain returned 2 days later, gentler this time, a whispering drizzle that soaked the moss-dark trees and turned the creek loud with runoff. Mariah sat at the table, sleeves rolled back, carefully stitching a torn saddlebag. Threads of russet light filtered through the window, gilding the worn wood floor and the edge of Gideon's coat, hanging by the door. Gideon came in from the shed, wiping his hands with a rag. He paused when he saw her bent over the needle. "That's good work," he said, stepping farther in. "Didn't think to ask if you knew mending." "I learned it after my father fell ill," she said, tying off the thread. "The nursemaid taught me. She said a lady should know how to fix what phrase." She looked up. "I used to think she meant the linens." His brow lifted slightly, then he nodded. "I could look at your coat next," she added. "It's thinning at the elbows." He hung the rag on a peg. "I thought I'd worn it soft enough not to notice." She folded the saddlebag closed and set it aside. "You'd notice if it gave out on the trail." They ate early, cornbread and boiled greens, then sat near the hearth where the fire burned low and steady. The storm had settled into a hush that filled the corners of the room, the kind of silence that asked nothing but allowed everything. "I got a letter last year," Gideon said, his voice quiet. "From a cousin down in Arkansas. He's got a parcel near Helena now. Said I could take over the North Field if I wanted." Mariah turned toward him. "Why didn't you go?" He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "Didn't feel like leaving something unfinished. I didn't know you had family." "Not many. My mother died young. Father worked the cotton fields until his lungs gave out. Most of the rest scattered after the war." She watched the firelight move over his face, the way the shadows caught in the hollows beneath his cheekbones. "I used to imagine I'd marry someone with land," she said. "But I never thought about the man himself. Just what he owned." "What changed?" "I did." He looked over at her. "You think about leaving again?" "Sometimes. When I wake too early. When it's too quiet. My mind still runs east before I stop it." He nodded, slow and without judgment. "If you wanted to write your aunt, I wouldn't stop you." Mariah laced her fingers together. "I don't even know if she's still in St. Joseph. She was never one for letters." "You want to look for her?" She shook her head. "I want to stop looking backwards." The fire popped softly, a pine not giving way. "I've been thinking about the second room," Gideon said after a moment. "It's not much, but it could hold a bed if I cleared the crates." Mariah's breath caught. "You don't have to do that." "I want to." "It's yours if you want it." She looked at him, heart tightening in her chest. "And if I wanted something closer?" He reached for her hand, not tentative this time, but sure. His thumb brushed across the back of her knuckles, calloused and warm. "I wouldn't stop you." She didn't pull away. That night, when she lay down in the loft, she stared at the planks above her and listened to the steady rhythm of the wind against the eaves. Her heart beat differently now, slower, stronger. Not with the crackling fear she'd once carried, but with something rooted. The next morning, she rose early, tied her hair back, and walked out to the corral where Gideon was pouring grain. The horses shifted at her approach, tails flicking in the cool air. "I want to learn to ride better," she said. He looked up. "You ride fine." "I want to ride like I belong on the trail. Like I could lead, not follow." He nodded once. "We'll go out after breakfast." They took a new route that morning, higher up the ridge where the pine gave way to sloping grass and the air tasted sharper. Mariah leaned forward in the saddle, trying to match Gideon's posture, his steady seat. He offered no corrections, only pointed to where the trail dipped, where shale might slide, where clouds built too fast on the horizon. At the summit, they stopped. The land rolled out beneath them, valleys stitched with rivers, distant peaks rimmed in snow. Mariah dismounted and walked to the edge, boots sinking into damp earth. "Have you ever thought about building more here?" she asked.
"A barn."
"A bigger porch. Chickens, maybe." Gideon stepped beside her. "I have." She turned to him. "With someone." His eyes held hers. "I hadn't until now." Mariah's cheeks flushed, but she didn't look away. "I want to stay, Gideon." He reached for her, slower than before, as if asking one last time. She stepped into his arms. The kiss that followed wasn't sudden or fierce. It was quiet.
Certain?
Like the first hard frost after harvest, expected, necessary, and full of promise. When they pulled apart, the wind rose and carried the scent of cedar between them. They rode home in silence, not because there was nothing to say, but because nothing needed to be said. That evening, she moved her things from the loft to the second room, but left the door open. The first snow came early that autumn, a quiet veil drifting down from a sky the color of pewter. Mariah stood at the edge of the porch, shawl drawn close around her shoulders, watching flakes settle into the grain of the steps. The hush of it made the whole world feel held in a breath. Behind her, Gideon stepped out with 2 mugs in hand, steam rising from the coffee. He passed one to her without a word. She took it, fingers brushing his, and held it beneath her chin for warmth. "They're early," she said. "Storms move different up here," he replied, resting against the post beside her. "Once the mountains catch it, there's no stopping it." She sipped slowly, watching the snow gather along the fence line they'd repaired together. Her voice was soft. "I used to dread winter. The dark, the waiting." "You still dread it?" She shook her head. "Not anymore." He didn't press further, just leaned a little closer, his shoulder a steady presence beside hers. That afternoon, they hauled the last of the root cellar stock inside sacks of potatoes, jars of preserved peaches, a crock of pickled greens. Mariah arranged the shelves while Gideon checked the seals on the window frames. The work was quiet, practiced, and shared. As dusk fell, she set a kettle on the stove and brought out the thick wool blanket folded at the foot of the bed in the second room. Gideon stood in the doorway, arms crossed loosely. "You've made this place different," he said. She smoothed the edge of the quilt. "How so?" "It's not just mine anymore. Doesn't feel hollow." She glanced up, color rising in her cheeks. "I don't feel like I'm passing through anymore." He stepped closer, brushing a hand along her hair. "I'd like to make it permanent." She met his eyes. "I'd like that too." They married in early November. No preacher, no witnesses beyond the land and the sky. Gideon carved 2 rings from scrap silver he'd kept in a tobacco tin, etched with simple lines like the ones on the hilt of his old hunting knife. They stood beneath the cottonwood behind the barn, the last of the golden leaves falling around them. He held her hands, warm in his calloused palms. "I don't promise ease," he said, "but I promise steadiness." "I never wanted ease," she said. "I only ever wanted truth." He kissed her then, slow and certain, as if sealing something they'd both carried too long without. The winter passed in quiet hours. Mornings began with bread baking and the low murmur of the fire, evenings with reading aloud, Gideon's voice steady over the pages, Mariah's fingers moving in idle circles along his sleeve. Some days brought storms that shuttered the sky and rattled the windows. On those days, she sat beside him by the hearth, mending seams or writing letters she never sent. He'd built her a desk from pine, sanded smooth and set beside the eastern window. "You said you used to write," he said when he gave it to her. "Before the world told me not to. You can write now."
She did.
In spring, the thaw came in slow rivulets along the path to the creek. They planted together rows of beans, squash, and tobacco for trade. Mariah learned the rhythm of it, the feel of the soil turning beneath her palms, the way seeds held promise just by being held. On a warm day in May, she paused at the edge of the field, one hand to her belly. Gideon saw her from the porch and walked down, boots soft in the new grass. "What is it?" he asked. She looked up, eyes shining. "I think we'll need another room." His breath caught just once, and then he smiled. They built it together, side by side with timber from the old pine grove north of the ridge. He taught her to measure the angles, to drive nails clean through the grain. She painted the frame soft blue, and he carved a cradle from cedar. When the baby came a girl with her father's dark eyes and her mother's quiet strength, they named her Clara. Years unfolded like pages turned by wind. The cabin grew not grand, but content. A lean-to for the animals, a bench beneath the cottonwood, a second desk for Mariah when she began copying letters for neighbors in town. Gideon traded pelts and tobacco, fixed saddles and sharpened tools. People came to know their place as solid ground. Clara learned to walk by gripping the porch rail, took first steps between her father's boots and her mother's skirts. She spoke late but sang early, her voice clear as whined through the trees. One summer evening, Mariah stood at the edge of the field, watching fireflies rise like stars summoned from the grass. Gideon came up behind her, arms circling her waist. "She looks like you," he said into her hair. Not just in the face, she answered. In the way she watches things. Quiet, but full of questions. He kissed her temple. She'll be all right. She'll be better than that. They stood watching Clara chase the lights, her laughter lifting on the breeze. Mariah leaned back against him. I never thought peace would feel like this. It's not peace if you don't earn it, he said. She tilted her head to kiss his jaw. Then we've earned it tenfold. He turned her toward him, hands at her waist. I love you, Mariah Ellard. I know, she said. I've known since you handed me that tin cup by the creek. They didn't speak again that night, just walked hand in hand back to the house, their daughter's laughter trailing behind them like music. And so the years passed, as they always do. Not quickly, but deeply. They built a life not from what they'd run from, but from what they chose. A life of quiet mornings, steady hands, and never having to flinch from love. And they were happy. Fully, entirely, and always.